Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Amy Liza Show. I have my friend Danielle here today with me. So you see her if you're on YouTube, you'll hear her if you're just on, the podcast, iTunes, wherever you're listening. So, Danielle, thanks for being here. I'm going to hand the proverbial mic over to you, and you can introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, what you do, all the things.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry to everyone on YouTube that I'm literally sitting in a closet right now, but
We love authenticity.
right? This I can get in my house from my children, and they're very loud. So this is where I sit. But I am Danielle Gagnon. I am a search engine optimization specialist. So I help people rank higher in Google. That's the simple way of putting it. And I've been doing SEO work, honestly, since about 2014. I'll tell the short version of how I got into all of this. But like a lot of people, I was sort of looking for an out from the 9 to 5 lifestyle, right? I had been working as a journalist and then had moved into marketing, and I liked my job, but I didn't like having a job. And so I was like, oh, I'll just start a blog and I'll get famous and quit my job. It'll be great. So I started the blog, but the rest did not happen the way I expected it to. I think at the time, like probably only my mom and my best friend were reading it, and I really only was getting traffic if I was, actively working really hard on Pinterest or Instagram and pushing people to this. And then one day I wrote this recipe. It was a food blog. I wrote a recipe for chicken tikka masala that you can make in the Instant Pot. And, a few weeks, a month went by, and I honestly thought my site had got hacked because I had suddenly had all of this traffic and I thought it was broken. Something was clearly wrong because nobody read my blog. But what actually happened was I had accidentally ranked that post on page one of Google, and I was getting tons of traffic to that post. And so at the time, I had heard of SEO because I was interested in blogging, but I didn't really know anything about it. And so that point in 2014, I realized like I have to learn everything I can about SEO if I want to make this blog work. And so I did end up growing the blog to the point where I made some money off of it. But what really happened for me was that I got super interested and passionate in SEO. I started using it in my 9 to 5 job. I ended up getting a new 9 to 5 job where SEO was a major part of my work. And then in 2018, I started my business. I went full time in 2019, and I've been helping small business owners and bloggers with SEO ever since.
I love that. We have such a similar timeline with when we started our business.
Yeah.
So funny. And that's funny. Well, we'll let everyone in that we did a podcast swap. So we've just been chatting, and we mentioned how like no one really, when you're growing up and you're little and someone says, what do you want to be when you grow up? You say like, I want to be an SEO expert,
Right.
funny how you kind of just happen upon it. What was
Yeah.
the one thing? So you learned what it is. What was the first like class or resource you used to start learning more?
Yeah, I actually listened to a ton of podcasts. So I, at the time, was commuting from New Hampshire, where I still live, to Boston with traffic. It was like 2 hours each way. So I had a lot of time stuck in the car. So I just started listening to all kinds of podcasts. There was a podcast called Pro Blogger. I don't even know if it's still a thing, honestly. I listened to Neil Patel and Brian Dean, who are both, really big names in the SEO world. I started listening to just all kinds of other business podcasts too. That was where I like really first started learning, and then did end up getting my employer to pay for a course as well, which was really helpful. But podcast was really like where I started learning the things that I was then like, okay, I'm going to go and try that with my next post, right? All of those sort of like actionable strategies.
I love that. What did your 9 to 5 let you help with SEO for them?
Yeah, so when I first started learning about SEO, I was working for a private school, like a very fancy private for elementary school, but college class per year. And we we mostly got business from referrals. We really weren't getting like anyone to our website. And so I was like, hey, what if I started a blog for the school? What if I started like creating some content around like how to choose a good private school in Boston and like all of these sorts of things that families might be searching for when they're starting to look for a private school in Boston. And so my boss at the time was just sort of let me do whatever I wanted. So she was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so I started doing some of that work, and like it started working. We started actually getting people to our site. We started bringing in a bigger, pool of people, and it wasn't overnight and it wasn't massive amounts, but it was enough to show me like, okay, this is actually doing something. This is actually working. And that just sort of propelled me to want to learn even more about it. And then when I moved to a different 9 to 5 job, that was for a small e-commerce company. We had literally like a team of like 8 people when I started, making multi-millions a year. And we had the smallest marketing budget I had ever worked with in my life. About 60% of our revenue was all coming from organic traffic. So that was a huge part of my job there.
Wow. That's impressive. Um, so you worked with them
Mhm.
then, and then who are you mostly working with now? Actually, before that, what is a reasonable time that people should expect results? Because I've offered SEO services in the past, so I'm curious to hear your answer to that.
Yeah, so this is always people's like number one question, right? That's what clients always want to know. What I always say, first of all, is that SEO is definitely a long game. It's not an overnight fix. You have to give yourself like at least a few months to start seeing changes. I've had clients generally, what I usually say is like generally after a few months, we will be starting to be seeing the shifts. Does that mean you're suddenly going to be getting like way more page views than you were getting before? No, probably not. Sometimes yes, like it does vary depending on the industry and how competitive the niche is and all of generally at least a few months to be starting to see those shifts. And then I usually tell people like 6 months, sometimes even longer, to see like really big results. I mean, I have one client whose story I like to share a lot because she really went from like 0 to page 1. I mean, to the point where when we started working together, she could type in her business name, her own name, her location, and her business would not show up. It was like Google did not think she existed. And within 6 months, about 6 months or 7 months maybe, she was on page 1 of Google in her industry when people were, searching for a business like hers. So it took some time, but she would tell you today, because she says it all the time, she's one of my best referral sources, I love her, that it literally transformed her business. And like that's one of the things I really love about SEO, is that it can have that really like life-changing impact.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. I'm glad you said that, because I usually preface with like, hey, we got to give it like 3 months at least to
Mm-hmm.
start seeing anything.
Yeah.
So when you go in and start working with a client, and you see maybe they've tried to dabble here and there with SEO, what are some like common mistakes that you've seen, and what are some easy fixes to those?
Yeah, I think probably the most common mistake I see people making is related to the keywords that they're using. So, for anyone that SEO is brand new to them, keywords are really the foundation of search engine optimization. So, they're the words and phrases that people are typing into Google when they're looking for something. And then, as the content creators, we want to be using the same words and phrases to craft our content. And a lot of times I see people making the mistake of trying to go after keywords that are too broad. And as a result, they, number one, can apply to all different kinds of content, all different kinds of information, and number two, are super competitive. So for example, I have a client who is a couples therapist. We've been working together for nearly 3 years now. When we first started working together, she was doing a lot of blogging, but most of her content was going after really broad phrases like someone's searching for couples therapist, right? First of all, someone looking for couples therapist might be looking in one specific area. They might just be wondering what a couples therapist does. They could be looking for a couples therapist job. Like there's so many things they could be looking for. And so as a result, it's really hard to get in front of the right people who actually want what you're offering. And then number two, because that's such a broad term, it's super competitive. There's so many other businesses and websites and blogs out there trying to show up for the same phrase. So what my biggest like first piece of advice is to get really, really clear on who it is you're trying to reach, and then get really specific on what they might be searching for. So instead of going after couples therapist, go after something like how to choose a couples therapist, or questions to ask your couples therapist, or like does my couples therapist hate me? Or I don't know what, but like those really like specific searches, those are how people search really. And it's going to help ensure that you're getting in front of the right people who actually want what you're offering.
Have you noticed a shift in like titles that work anything with like voice search? Because I know that was kind of like trending a while ago, but I'm not sure if it ever like picked up.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I think connects to voice search is the question-based searches. So we as humans tend to talk to our phone or our Alexa devices as other people, right? Like I'm constantly like, Alexa, what's the weather? Or things like that. We tend to ask them questions. And so I think that's been one of the biggest shifts in terms of how people search is that question based search. And we do it just in Google too, right? It's not just when we're using our voice search, but I do think that it's like tied to that for sure. And we've even seen Google really embrace that kind of searching. They have their people also ask section that now shows up in almost everything you search for, which is just a question and answer based format right within a search results. So I think, you know, Google also recognizes obviously the increase in that, and they're really putting a lot of energy into that too. So I love using question and answers in my content. I like using people also ask questions to like help me figure out what I'm going to write a blog post about, for example, or putting a bunch of those questions together into one blog post. So yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest things when it comes to the impact of voice search for sure.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great tip for finding topics is to just you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I know there's like an infinite amount of keyword research tools and SEO software you can get, but I always like just using Google or Pinterest or YouTube and just see what other people are searching for and pull
Mm-hmm.
there. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I recommend that to people all the time. I mean, I that's how I always start my keyword research process. I do have a keyword research tool that I like to use that gives me actual data, but I always start in Google or YouTube, or if I'm working with like an e-com brand, for example, I'll start in Amazon or Etsy and sort of see those like product focused searches, because the predictive search, right, when you start typing and like the little drop down shows you what other people are searching for, I mean, that is such an easy way and it to start playing around with what are the words and phrases that people are typing into here. And I love that it's really accessible, that literally anybody with a computer can go do that. You don't have to buy any fancy equipment. You don't have to know what all of this data is that a keyword research tool is giving to you. And it really is like really, really beneficial. When I first started incorporating a lot of like people also ask questions, for example, into my clients' content, I immediately saw an impact. I mean, they've, number one, been able to more easily create really helpful, valuable content because we're answering questions we know people are asking. And number two, I mean, we've been able to have some of my clients have been able to rank like as the answers for those questions in Google, and that is like a huge opportunity to get clicks through to your website because people tend to focus on those sort of like search engine results features as they call them.
Yeah, I love that. You mostly in your strategies use blogs and publishing new content to get traffic, or is there like a backlinking strategy that you follow? And is that even like that seems to me a little higher level, the whole backlinking thing? And is it something that's really honestly worth like a newer person investing in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I agree that backlinking, especially like really proactively going after backlinks, I always think of as being sort of like a next level SEO thing. Like once you've gotten in a really good place with the content, like your content that you're creating, then you can go out and start focusing on trying to get backlinks. I personally don't do a lot of that work with my clients. I will sometimes help them with like a strategy to do that outreach on their own. I just don't enjoy it. It's not fun for me. So I don't do much of it, but I really prefer focusing on the content side in terms of like what I'm actually doing for clients. And I also just think backlinks are important for sure. They act like, you know, a thumbs up or an endorsement of your site in the eyes of Google. And so they absolutely have a positive impact and can be helpful. But if your content is not valuable and helpful and in depth and like really high quality, all the backlinks in the world are like really not going to help you at the end of the day, because yes, you need Google to pay attention to you, but you also then need to have the humans that get to your site like what you're putting out there and connect with it and find it useful and then want to take that next step, whatever that next step is. So I really focus on creating new content, but also updating old content. I have a client, a couples therapist client actually, for close to 18 months. We did not create any brand new content. All we did, she didn't have the person who was writing content for her before. She couldn't really afford for me to write all of her content for her, and she just didn't have time to do it. So instead I was like, okay, well, we're just going to take all these blog posts you've written in the past and we're going to update them, and we're going to optimize them, and we're going to make the most of this huge bank of content that you already have. So for 18 months, that was all we did. There was no brand new content. And over those 18 months, and I'm not going to remember the stat off the top of my head, but we grew her traffic by almost 200%,
Wow.
only by updating old existing content. So I like to tell that story because I think a lot of times people feel like, oh my God, like I can't just like keep creating all of this new content all the time. But there's so many opportunities to grow your site even through content that you've already created.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good strategy. How do you recommend people kind of promote their new content, or do you rely solely on like the Google algorithm?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in my business, I'm very focused on the Google algorithm, but I never want people to just like sit there and hope for the best either. Like definitely being proactive is helpful. So what I usually recommend is let your SEO content, so that long form content, whether it's a blog post or even like YouTube and podcast episodes could be search friendly content. Let that long form content really be the foundation of your marketing efforts, and then pull other content out of that. You and I talked about this on the episode we recorded for my show. Repurpose this content. You're already putting tons of time and energy into creating that long form content. So a blog post, for example, could easily become 10 to 15 social media posts. If you're sharing 10 tips or 10 strategies, each one of those can be at least one social media post. Each one could be a TikTok video or a reel, an email, a YouTube video. You could read your blog post and record it as a podcast. Like there's so many things you can do once you've created that long form content. So absolutely, like don't stop at the blog post. Repurpose it, turn it into all content for all of those other channels. And then you're just going to give yourself this really diversified source of traffic, right? You're getting it from all the places.
Yes. Yeah. I love that strategy. And you just hate to see this like helpful, important information just sitting, on a website, and then someone struggling to create social media posts when
Mm-hmm.
they have all a whole month or more worth in their, on their blog. Another technical question, how many like posts do you recommend people publish per month on their website if they want to start seeing that?
And I think it varies a little bit, but what I usually tell my clients is I want them to do something that they can be consistent with. I want it to be as regular as possible, but I also want it to be realistic. So I say at least once a month. I mean, if you can create content weekly, if you have a team or you just love writing and like have the time, that's awesome. If you can't though, once a month consistently is great. I the thing that I always worry about, or that I see people struggling with, is telling themselves I'm going to do a blog post every week, and they do that for a month or two, and then they get so burnt out that then they don't blog again for like 3 months or 6 months. So choose an amount of content that's going to actually be realistic, that you can stick with consistently, ideally at least once a month.
I love that advice. It's like, what's the best workout? It's like the one you'll actually do.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm wondering, you shared about already a client success story, but if there's any more that stand out to you, and you want to share, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite clients to talk about actually is a food blogger client. Now, I loved working with this client because that's how I started, was a food blog. But she was running into challenge, I think, for a lot of bloggers, but especially for food bloggers, where like, what am I supposed to write besides this recipe? And it's like a running joke online, right? Like, we just want the recipe. Stop telling me like what the weather was on the day you made these cookies or whatever. So she was really struggling with this idea of like, how can I create enough content to make Google happy without like pissing off everybody that's reading my blog post? And so we actually did a VIP day together, which was really helpful for her because she was creating so much content. She didn't just want to outsource it. She actually wanted to learn how to do this better for herself. And so we were able to work together to come up with a really solid strategy where she could create longer form content, but that's actually helpful. And a lot of that was based on playing around in Google and seeing what are the people also ask questions that people are asking related to this recipe or this kind of food. So like, what ingredients do they have questions about? What cooking methods, like what are they asking about the cooking what are they asking about in terms of like the equipment that they need? And how can you create a piece of content that, yes, is more than just a recipe, but is actually helpful and not just like, it was a dark and stormy night when I created this recipe and my grandma was over, right? Like it's actually helpful, valuable information. She has seen increases in traffic since then. She's been able to go back and update a bunch of content that she already had on her site and start getting more traffic to those. But I think for her, and she said this to me, that like one of the biggest benefits was just feeling like really confident that she knew how to create blog topics that were helpful for her in terms of getting traffic and also like actually valuable for her audience. I think that's one of the biggest struggles, right? Like Google keeps telling us over and over again, like long form content, but nobody feels good just putting out like random BS, right? We want to make sure that it's actually helpful.
Yeah, for sure. It gets overwhelming. It's like long form, but then don't repeat yourself too much, and then don't do this, and then they'll switch the ideal word links. And
Yeah.
is there like a through line with what you should just focus on? Is it just like that being consistent piece of it and like pumping up value? Or because I feel like people get really hung up on like how many words is it, or things like that. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Google does really love long form content. I think the biggest things though are being consistent and then getting in depth. Like don't necessarily focus so much on the actual word count, but when you go to sit and write a post, don't sit down thinking like, "Oh, I'm just going to write like a 500 word surface level post." Really, whatever the topic is, think really hard and do actual research on like what questions do people have about this? How can I break this topic down into like a bunch of smaller parts? And then how can I give people like all of everything in my brain about this little part, really sharing your expertise. And I think that sometimes that is scary for people, or they worry, if I share all of this information in a blog post, why is anybody going to pay to work with me? But there will always be those people. You can read about a topic and how to do something and how to fix XYZ problem over and over and over again. It doesn't mean you're not going to hire someone to do that. I mean, for example, I really want to redo my master bathroom, and I read posts all the time about like how to tile a shower and how to do all these things. And all it's doing is making me realize that I need to hire someone to do this. Like I'm not capable of doing this myself. And the content, while very helpful and valuable, is really just showing me how it's not the thing that I'm going to be doing. So I think we don't need to worry about like being too helpful. Honestly, the right people are going to be like attracted to that and want to work with you even more.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. So you mentioned that you are a mom and
Mhm.
you're obviously an entrepreneur, business owner, and I know there's a lot of moving parts going on there. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for other moms who maybe want to do what you did and transition from 9 to 5 to working for yourself, some things that surprised you about the experience or any support you can give them.
Yeah. So I think my best advice would to be to just sort of like accept the mess, I guess is the best way to describe it. I am very much a type A kind of person. I want to do things well. I want to do things perfectly. I don't like to make mistakes. I don't like things to go wrong. And I have had to grow in that area so much in over the last 4 or 5 years. And because like it just is going to be messy sometimes. And even when you plan something to a T, like things are going to go wrong. And I think it's being adaptable and being able to sort of overcome that and realize like, okay, this didn't go exactly the way I wanted, but it doesn't mean everything's going to come crashing, burning down around me. Like we can still keep going. That's been the most important lesson. Like when I was first starting, especially, just sort of accepting that this was a season, right? Like this was a phase of life where it was going to be hard for a little while. I was working my 9 to 5 job. I had one child at the time and I was pregnant with my second, and I I was exhausted, and like it was 6 months probably of doing all of that at the same time, and it was super super hard, but it led to this way more awesome life. And so just like accepting the mess, accepting that it was going to be kind of a hot mess for a while was definitely important for me. And there's been phases like that since. I mean, COVID happened and I suddenly had 2 kids at home while trying to run my business. Then I had a third baby during COVID and I was trying to manage all of that. And so like just accept the mess.
I love that. I think that's beautiful advice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And please let everyone know how they can get in contact with you and what you offer.
Yeah, so I would love to connect with anyone. I am most active on Instagram. That's definitely the best place to find me. So I am at Danielle Gagnon _S. You can also visit my website, danielle-gagnon.com. And if you want to learn more about SEO, I can share a link to my free PDF guide with 10 simple tips to go from buried to page 1 of Google.
Yay, we love that. I'm excited to get that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you for everyone listening. If you want to get in contact with me, Instagram at Amy Leisner, TikTok at Amy Leisner, my website, A18Media.com. And then we'll have all the links in the show notes. So that's it for today. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.